Okay, now we're going to learn about transition commands. If I go back to my dialog tree here, you can see that I have 3 conversations and each of them has 3 blocks. And I mentioned at the beginning of this video that at any time you can make dialog transition from one block to another. So let me show you how this works. Here I have conversation 1, block 1, and Alice has a line. Hi, I'm Alice, what's your name? Now, of course, we could make John answer immediately here, like this. But we want to see what transition commands do. So instead, we're going to place John's line in a different block. Okay, so now Alice's line is inside block 1 and John's answer is in block 2. Now, the thing to understand is that when there's no more lines inside a block, the dialog engine does not automatically continue to the next block. Okay, so if the dialog engine is running all the lines in block 1, when it's finished with block 1, it doesn't go to block 2 and then block 3 and so on. Okay, if block 1 has no more lines, the dialog just ends. So what we want to do here, we want to connect block 1 to block 2. And this is why we use transition commands. Here, at the bottom of the screen, you have this panel with all the commands. Now, by default, it's going to show the control command tab, and we need to go to the transitions tab. Here in the transitions tab, you have these 5 commands: line mark, jump, bridge, return, and end. Now, jump and bridge are the commands we use to go from one block to another. And there's an important difference between jump and bridge. Let's start with the jump command. All you need to do is click on it, and it's going to insert a jump command. Notice that the jump command has a red background, and the reason for this is to make it stand out so you can immediately see that dialogue is going to get interrupted here and it's going to switch to another block. One thing I should mention at this point is that you can actually customize the colors of all the commands. If you go to the settings menu and you go to the colors tab, right here you can configure different colors for every single command. For example, here in green we have the control commands, and their text is green but their background is transparent. And here we have the jump command. The text is white and the background is red. So if you want to change the text or the background color, just click those buttons and select a new color. Alright, I'm going to keep the red background here. Now, we need to configure the jump command. And we need to tell it where to jump to. So if we click the button here, it's going to show us a list of conversations. Here we go. It shows us all the conversations in our dialogue. So this way we don't have to type anything. Now we're transitioning to conversation 1, block 2. So we would select conversation 1. And here, for the block, we also have a list of all the blocks in conversation 1, because conversation 1 is selected. So let's select block 2. And finally here, we can specify a line to jump to in case we want to jump to a specific line. Now, you can, if you want to jump to the first line in the block, type 0, and I mentioned this before, but lines always start at 0, not 1. But if you're gonna jump at line 0, you don't even have to type it. This will save you some time. If you don't provide a value here, Candy Dialog Engine will assume that you want to transition to line 0. So we can leave this empty. And now let's test our dialog and see what happens. So here we go. Hi, I'm Alice. What's your name? And now let's see if the jump command worked. Hi, I'm John. It worked. So yeah, as you can see, Alice is speaking, and then it jumps to block 2. And here we have, well, first we have a comment line, and as a reminder, comment lines do nothing in Candy Dialog Engine. Candy Dialog Engine skips them. So it skips the line here, the comment, and it immediately shows John's answer. Hi, I'm John. Now let's go back to block 1 because I want to show you something else. It's a small detail, but it can save you a lot of time when working if you use a lot of transitions. If you transition inside a block which is located in the same conversation, so here we are in conversation 1, block 1, and we're transitioning to conversation 1, block 2, so it's the same conversation. Well, in that case, you don't even have to provide the conversation. If the conversation field is empty, Candy Dialog Engine will assume that you're transitioning to block 2 in the same conversation, assuming that conversation actually has a block 2, of course. And if you click the button here for the blocks, it's going to list the blocks in conversation 1, even though we didn't provide conversation 1. So the program is intelligent this way. And this also applies to blocks. If I delete the block, Candy Dialog Engine assumes I want to transition to the same block that the command is in. So here it will assume I want to transition to block 1. And why would I want to transition to block 1? Well, you might want to transition to a specific line in block 1. For example, let's imagine I have many lines here. I could write this, line 12, and Candy Dialog Engine, it sees there's no conversation, so it assumes we want to transition to the same conversation. It sees there's no block, so it assumes we're transitioning to the same block. And then it sees 12, and now it's thinking, okay, let's transition to line 12 inside the same block. All right. And now let's talk about the bridge command. Let's say that after John answers Alice, we want to go back to block 1, and we want Alice to say something back. So let me just add a line for Alice. So she's going to say, "It's really nice to meet you, John." Now, obviously, we need a transition here in order to go back right here. So one way we could do it is to add another jump command and make it jump to block 1, and then make it jump to line 3. And let's see how it works. Hi, I'm Alice. Hi, I'm John. And it should jump back and continue. It's really nice to meet you, John. Great. However, this is not the recommended way of doing it. And the reason it's not recommended is that, first of all, you have to add an additional jump command here. And more importantly, a jump is a permanent transition. So anytime you jump, the dialog basically restarts after the jump. It's as if you're starting a new dialog. Every line that was processed before the jump is deleted. It's not deleted from your actual dialog script, but the engine forgets about all the previous line, everything. So instead of using the jump command in situations like this, we can use the bridge command. So let me delete those commands here. And I'm going to delete this one here. And here I'm going to insert a bridge command. And a bridge is a momentary transition. So let me transition to block 2 here. And here's what happens. The dialog bridges to block 2 here. And once it has ran John's line, there's no more lines left. And normally the dialog would end here. However, because the dialog bridged in order to get here, instead of ending the dialog, it's going to return from the bridge automatically. So it's going to come back here after the bridge and run this line. Let me show you. Hi, I'm Alice. What's your name? Hi, I'm John. And now it returned from the bridge automatically. There you go. So yeah, this would be the right way of doing it. When you want to make a temporary detour in the dialog and then you want to come back, you should use the bridge command rather than jump commands. And this way it just acts as if block 2 was inserted here. Instead of restarting a dialog at block 2 and then restarting a dialog at block 1, line 3, it just flows smoothly. Now let's discuss some more transition commands. First, we have line mark. And this one is actually important. Let's imagine that after Alice says this, John wants to say something back. So, for example, he might say, "What are you studying, Alice?" And currently, what would happen here, Alice would speak this line, "Hi, I'm Alice." Then it would bridge here, "Hi, I'm John." And then it would run this line, "What are you studying, Alice?" But that's not what we want. What we want to do here, we want John to say, "Hi, I'm John." And then Alice says, "It's really nice to meet you." And then John asks, "What are you studying, Alice?" So here, we want to guarantee that the dialog is going to return from the bridge after this line. And to do this, we can just insert the return command. And this command is basically telling Dialog Engine, if you came to this block from a bridge, return from that bridge. Let me show you. Hi, I'm Alice, I'm John, and now it should return from the bridge, and it did exactly that. "It's really nice to meet you, John." It didn't run, "What are you doing? What are you studying, Alice?" Perfect. Okay. So now here we can bridge again. we need to bridge again to this line, right? So far what I showed you is you do it like this, find the line number, I think it's 3. Yeah, it's 3. Okay, so Alice is going to introduce herself, John will introduce himself, then Alice is going to say it's nice to meet you, and then it's going to transition again. It's going to bridge again here. What are you studying, Alice? There's just one small problem here. We're using the line index. And the problem is a line index is not reliable. You have the option of using line indexes, but it's not recommended at all, because here's what happens. Imagine I decide later to add one more line here. And now this line is at index 4. It's no longer 3. And so the transition here, it's not going to work anymore. It's going to transition to the wrong line. So instead of using line indexes for transitions, we should use the line mark command. So here I'm inserting a line mark, and I'm going to give it a reference. You can give it any reference you want. Make sure it's not just numbers, okay? If you write this, it's going to be mistaken for a line index. So you can write a mix of letters and numbers, that's fine, but don't write numbers only. So I'm going to write this reference here. And now I'm going to go back to block 1, to my bridge command, and I'm going to click here the 3 dots button, and it shows me all the line marks in block 2. It's a bit small, but here I have my line mark reference. So I'm going to select it, and that's what line marks are for. You can use them to transition. That's all they do. In Candy Dialog Engine, when the dialog runs, the line mark doesn't do anything. The engine is going to skip over it, basically. But the bridge command is going to use it to transition. So let's see how that works. Hi, I'm Alice. Bridge to John. Hi, I'm John. Return to Alice. It's nice to meet you. And now we're going to bridge to the line mark. What are you studying, Alice? There we go. As I mentioned, the line mark doesn't do anything in your game. It gets skipped over, but the bridge transitions to it. So the result is that the bridge here essentially goes directly to this line. Okay, I hope that's clear. It's really not complicated. So yeah, that's how you use transitions. And the last thing I want to add here is a quick mention about the end command. And you might guess what that does. It's going to end the dialogue. So if you ever want to end the dialogue early, or you want to make sure the dialogue ends at a specific point, you can insert the end command. As I mentioned, dialogue ends automatically when it runs out of lines. But it's recommended that you always add the end command. It's safer this way. It can avoid unexpected behavior. And importantly, it reminds you when dialogue ends, because if you make a game with a lot of dialogues, you might not remember exactly every place dialogue should end. So this way, it also acts as a reminder for yourself that you wanted dialogue to end at this point. Quickly show you. So we bridge here, and if I don't have the end command, dialogue will end automatically, because here's what happens. After running this line, there's no more lines, so it returns from the bridge. And after returning, there's no more lines either here, so at that point it's going to end. But let's imagine that I actually have one more line here. And because there's another line, I don't want to return from the bridge. I want to end. So if I insert the end command here, it won't return from the bridge. It won't run this line. Let me show it to you. Hi, I'm Alice. I'm John. It's really nice to meet you, John. And now we are bridging once more to John. What are you studying, Alice? And now the dialogue should end instead of returning from the bridge. And there you go. It ended. As you can see, this line was not run because the dialogue never returned from the bridge. It just ended here. So that's all for now regarding the transition commands, but we're going to see a few more practical applications later when we discuss the condition commands. Because when we have conditions, we will typically do some jumping and bridging. Now, before we learn about other commands, we need to learn about how Candy Dialog Engine works with variables. Let me add a jump command once again. And something you need to know is that in pretty much every data field, instead of writing a value like this, you can provide a reference to a variable in your game. And here, for conversation, as an example, if I provide a reference to a variable, when the command runs, Candy Dialog Engine will look up the variable and it will use the value of the variable as the conversation to transition to. Now, obviously, the value has to be a conversation, otherwise it's not going to work. But you can do this for pretty much every data field in your dialog in commands. You can replace all the data with variable references. Let's look at an example. Here I have this script called globals, and it's an autoload in my game, or an autoload is sometimes called a singleton. Now here in the script I have these two variables, conversation value and block value. So I'm going to provide a conversation here, and for block value I'm going to provide a block. Simple. Now back in Candy Dialog Creator, I'm going to provide references to these variables. And since those variables are located inside an autoload, I'm going to use the symbol that Candy Dialog Engine uses to identify autoloads. And by default, the symbol is the British pound symbol, this one. And this symbol will tell Candy Dialog Engine to look up a variable inside an autoload. Small note, you can customize this symbol and all the other symbols that I'm going to show you. And I will explain how to customize these symbols later. So if this symbol is not convenient for you to use because you have a different keyboard layout or for any reason, don't worry about that. You can change the symbols. Okay, so this symbol tells Candy Dialog Engine it needs to look for a variable inside an autoload. And next we need to write the autoload. So my autoload is globals. There we go. And finally, I need to include the period here. Don't forget that. And finally, I need to write the variable name, which is conversation underscore value. And this tells Candy Dialog Engine, look inside the autoload named globals and look for the variable named conversation value and get the value of that variable. And here I'm going to provide a reference to the other variable, globals period block underscore value. And just to show you quickly, this will transition to block 2 because that's the value of block value, block 2. And here I have block 2, and it has this line. This is block 2. So if we see this, it means that it worked. So let's test it. This is block 1. This is correct. First Alice says this. And now if I press space, if the variable reference is worked, the jump command will jump to block 2. It worked. This is block 2. So, yeah. As you can see here, you can replace any value with a variable reference. Now, why would you do this? What's the purpose? Well, sometimes you may not know in advance, that is when you're writing your dialogue, you may not know what value you want to assign, because depending on the command and depending on what you're using the command for, you might want to assign different values at different moments in the game. So in that case, you could use a variable reference, and you can design your game to update the variable's value as needed when the game runs. Now, variable references are not limited to variables inside autoloads. You can provide a reference to a variable inside a node. And let me show you. Here I have my game scene, and it has a script attached. And in that script, I have these two variables, again, conversation value and block value. So I'm going to give them some actual values. I'm going to assign the value conversation 1 again. But here, I will assign block 3. There we go. Save, and back to Candy Dialog Creator. So now I want to provide a reference to these variables. So let me delete this. So in order to provide a reference to a variable inside a node, I need to use the node symbol. And by default, it's the $sign. This is the same symbol that you use in GDScript when you provide a node path somewhere in your code. So here, I would write $sign, and then I would write the path to the node. Now, one thing to remember is that Candy Dialog Engine follows the path from the root node of your game. So, for example, my full path, including the root, would be this: root game. But Candy Dialog Engine already starts here when it's reading this reference, so I need to delete this. Okay, make sure you do not include root here. So I'm just going to write game because that's the node I'm looking for. And next I'm going to provide the name of the variable. Like this. And here, for block, I want to use the block value variable. Okay, let's test it. And if it works, it's going to jump to block 3. So the dialog should say block 3 after the jump. Let's see if it's working. This is block 1, and now it's going to jump. This is block 3. As you can see, it worked. And finally, there's a third option for variable references. And This one is a custom Candy dialog engine type of reference. If we go to the Candy database script, that's the same script where you have the actors dictionary, and we scroll up here, we have this dictionary here called variables. And you can add variables in there, essentially. So let me do this. I will add a variable called conversation, and I'm assigning conversation1 as the value. And I'm adding another variable named block, and I will assign block4 as the value. Now, these are not, in terms of code, they're not actual variables, they're dictionary keys, but Candy Dialog Engine will treat them as variables. Let me show you. So here, in our jump command, we need to use a third symbol, and it's the euro symbol by default. And again, you can customize it. I will show you that later. And when you use the euro symbol, it tells Candy Dialog Engine to look for a variable in this dictionary. It's very straightforward. So all I need to do here is provide the name of the dictionary key, and in that case it's conversation. That's it. And here, block. And it's going to look up the value of these two keys and use these values. So let's test it. Here we go. This is block 1, and now it should jump to block 4. This is block 4. It worked again. Just remember, do not include quotation marks. Typically, dictionary keys would require quotation marks, but in this case, we are treating the dictionary keys like variables, so no quotation marks. And as you can see, this is a much quicker way of typing a variable reference, because you just type the variable. You don't have to type the autoload or the path. Now, I mentioned that the symbols for the variable references can be customized. So let me show you how to do this, because this is actually very important. Depending on your keyboard layout, you may find that the default symbols are not very practical to use. So you should change them in that case. And it's important that you modify the symbols early, because once you start writing dialogue, if you want to change the symbols later, you will need to update the symbols manually everywhere in your dialogue if you've already used them. So to change the symbols, go to your CandyDE folder, and then to the scripts folder, and go to the user data folder. And here, open the Candy properties script. There we go. The Candy properties script contains various settings for the dialog engine. And here, right here, we have all the symbols that you can customize. So here you have singleton symbol, and that's the symbol for referencing variables inside autoloads. You have the node symbol, and that's for referencing node paths. And you have the var_dict symbol. var_dict is a constriction of variable dictionary. So this is the euro symbol I used earlier. So you can modify these symbols. And then here you have the super symbols. I'm going to talk about them in a moment. And you have a few other symbols here, and we will talk about them later. The important thing is, once again, make sure you modify all these symbols early before you start using them too much, because if you change them later, you must update them manually in your dialogues. There's no automatic way to update them at this moment. Now, you can't just use any symbol you want. This is where it gets a little bit complicated. There are rules and guidelines as to which symbols you can choose. And luckily we have a guide that explains these rules and guidelines. If you go to the Candy Dialog Engine folder that you downloaded, you have the Documents folder, which I already mentioned several times, and then you have the Guides folder. And here in the Guides folder, you have this document, variables.pdf. So open this, and it's going to explain what I just explained about variable references. And if you scroll to the bottom, here you have this section called Customizing Symbols. And here it tells you all the rules and guidelines you need to follow when customizing symbols, because depending on the symbol, there are characters that you can or cannot use. And as I mentioned, it is a little bit complicated. I'm not going to pretend it's simple. So yeah, I apologize for that, but there's not really any other way to make it simpler. And luckily here, there's a small list of symbols that's provided, and these symbols should work with everything. So you can more or less safely use those characters. But yes, please, if you're going to customize symbols instead of using the default ones, please follow these rules carefully. And if you do, everything should be fine. And if you're unsure, if you have any doubts, feel free to ask questions, feel free to ask for advice. You can post on our discussion board on GitHub, you can post in the comments in this video. We will be happy to answer. Now, a few more things I want to mention. First of all, in case it's not clear, you don't have to customize the symbols, that's optional. So if these symbols are fine for your own use, you can keep them. Second, don't worry, Candy Dialog Engine is really not that complicated. This is the most complicated part of Candy Dialog Engine. And you know, it's not that hard. It's not something that you need to be an experienced programmer to do. So, you know, don't let this intimidate you. Don't let this make you assume everything about Candy Dialog Engine is difficult. This is really the worst of it. So if you can do this, everything else in Candy Dialog Engine is easier than that. Now, you probably remember earlier I talked about the inserts here on the right. And, well, I want to mention this. Here, you can see we have buttons that match the variable reference symbols. And these buttons do exactly what you're probably assuming they do. If I click this button here, it's going to insert the singleton or autoload symbol. If I click this button, it inserts the notepath symbol. And what happens if you customize your symbols? If you're not using those symbols? Well, you're in luck. Candy Dialog Creator thought of everything. Go to your Settings menu, and then go to the Symbols tab here. And here, you have the path to the Candy Properties script by default, assuming you didn't move the script. If you did move the script somewhere else, make sure you update this path. And here you have all the symbols inside the Candy Properties script. And if you've modified the symbols, you can change them manually, like this. But that's not even necessary. Let me show you. Here, I'm going to change the singleton symbol. I'm going to change it to this. I don't know what it's called. And now that I've changed it, all I need to do is click the update button here. And it automatically updates all my symbols to match the symbols in my project. Easy. Now let me just change it back because I don't want to use that symbol. I want to keep the pound sign. And here I'm going to update again, and it reverts it. Simple. So, you know, let's imagine that I keep this symbol. Okay, let's pretend this is my symbol for singletons. Well, here I can first of all notice that the button updated to show my symbol, the one I customized. And second, I can just click on it and it will write my custom symbol. Now, let me just revert it since I want the pound sign. There we go. Let me show you some more advanced options for variable references. For example, let's imagine that I have a dictionary for character data. So we're pretending that this is a dictionary in my game. And let's say I want to reference the health of a specific character. So I can do this. There you go. I can reference a dictionary key, and I can even reference nested dictionaries. Exactly like in GDScript. You can do the same thing in GDScript. Okay. If I have an array like this, I can reference an index, exactly like GDScript. And if I have nested arrays, I can reference multiple nested indexes, like in GDScript. Or I can also have a mix of nested dictionaries and nested arrays, like this. That works, like in GDScript. But let me show you something even more powerful. In my global script, I created this array. It contains the name of every block in my dialog. Block 1, 2, 3, and 4. And here, I can do this. I'm going to reference, sorry, I should do that here. I'm going to reference the blocks array and index 1. So if it works correctly, it should transition to block 2. Let's test it. Block 1 and block 2. It worked. Okay. As you can see, it works with arrays, and I'm not going to show you, but I guarantee it works with dictionaries as well. But now let me show you. This is the more powerful thing I want to show you. Here I have this variable, selected block, and it's an integer. It has the value 2. So let me show you what I can do here. Globals dot selected block. I'm replacing the index value with another variable reference. And index 2, it's block 3, because it, again, if you're a beginner, it starts at 0. 0, 1, 2. Okay, so if this works, it's going to transition to block 3. So let's test it. Block 1, this is block 3. Now that's pretty cool, right? So yeah, you can use variable references. You can replace data in your dialog with a variable reference. And you can even replace keys and indexes in those variable references with more variable references. So as you can see, variable references are pretty much identical to GDScript. The only difference is in Candy Dialog Engine, for variable references, you always need to add a symbol. In GDScript, you don't need a symbol for autoloads. But in Candy Dialog Engine, you need a symbol, because if you don't have a symbol, Candy Dialog Engine will think that this is the actual value for this data. So the symbol tells Candy Dialog Engine, this is not the value you need to use, this is a variable reference. Okay, but otherwise it's identical to GDScript. There's also another important difference. In GDScript, you can include quotation marks in a node path, but Candy Dialog Engine does not support quotation marks inside node paths for variable references. So this would not work because the quotation marks are not supported. And also in Candy Dialog Engine, in variable references, you cannot have spaces. So this would also break because of the spaces. So if you're going to reference a node in Candy Dialog Engine, that node must not have any spaces in its name. So this is something you need to remember. One small note, the official Godot documentation says that it's not recommended to use spaces in node names anyway. Godot supports the spaces in node names, but the documentation does not advise doing it. So yeah, those are some of the limitations, and we might be able to fix, we might be able to support the quotation marks later in a future update. For now, it's not possible. Let's now learn how to display variable values inside spoken text. As an example, we're going to have Alice tell us how many gold coins she has. Like this. I have X gold coins. Now, of course, we want to replace the X with the actual number of coins. To do that, we need to look inside our script to find the variable that stores the number of gold coins Alice owns. And here it is. The variable is inside our project's globals script, and it's this one, Alice_gold, and the value is 50. So we want to display this variable in Alice's speech. So here's how you do it. First, you need to use a special symbol to tell Candy Dialog Engine that you're providing a variable reference. And by default, the symbol is this one. It's an opened curly bracket followed by a closed parenthesis. And then you would provide a variable reference as I showed you previously, like this. The pound sign because the variable is in an autoload, and then globals, period, Alice gold. And finally, you add the closing symbol, which tells Candy Dialog Engine that the variable reference ends, like this. It's a closed curly bracket. So let's test it in our game, see if it actually works. And there you go. Alice says, I have 50 gold coins. You can see that it works. Great. Now, you might be wondering, why was this strange combination of symbols chosen by default? And that's because we needed a symbol that is unlikely to appear in any dialog lines as text that you want to display on screen. Okay, if we just used a curly bracket, well, anytime you want to actually display a curly bracket on screen, For example, imagine you're using curly brackets to indicate the mood of a character, like this, and you want this to show up on screen. If this is the symbol for variable references, then Candy Dialog Engine would confuse this with a variable reference. And, it would crash or something wouldn't display properly. Either way, it would cause a conflict. So, curly bracket followed by parenthesis, it's very unlikely you would ever want to display this inside your text. You would probably only ever use it for variable references. But if you don't like it, you can customize it. And as a reminder, customizing these symbols is done in the Candy Properties script. And the script is here, Candy Properties. It's the same script where we also configure the variable reference symbols. So the symbols are here. Text var symbol start and text var symbol end. And again, remember to read the documentation on variables because there's some rules you need to follow when you customize any of the symbols. Now, you don't have to worry though, because there's actually a shortcut to insert symbols. These symbols specifically. Here, on the right in the Inserts panel, you have this button, Text Variable. And if you click it, it's going to insert the symbols. You can see here, I have the opening symbol to indicate a variable reference, and I have the closing symbol. And I can just write my variable in here between the two symbols. But you don't even have to do it like this. You can just write the variable first, highlight it, and then click Text Variable. And it will insert the symbols automatically on each side. So this makes things a little bit more easier. Now, you can of course reference node paths inside those symbols, and of course you would use the node path symbol for that, or you can reference variables inside the variables dictionary with the euro symbol, as I showed you earlier. All three methods work. But there's also an extra method. You can write an actor reference. For example, let's say Alice wants to introduce herself. And here's how we do it. We write Alice's actor reference, which is Alice with a capital A. And this will look for Alice's data inside the actor's dictionary. And as a reminder, this is the actor's dictionary. So right now, if I just write Alice, it's going to write the entire dictionary on screen. But that's not what I want. I want to write Alice Turner, which is her display name. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So here, I write Alice, and then I provide the display name key. And of course, don't forget the closing symbol for the variable reference. And now, let's test it. I'm Alice Turner, and this works for any key inside the actor's dictionary. Now, let's learn about another concept called roles. And roles answer the following question. What do you do when you don't know in advance who is going to speak a specific line? For example, some lines might be spoken by a random enemy or a random NPC, or in games where the player can have companions, a line might be spoken by the second companion, but when you write the dialogue, you don't know who the second companion will be because the player can choose their companions. So this is why we would use roles. let me show you. Here I have this line where Alice is introducing herself. And now we're going to add a role reference to whoever is answering her. So instead of providing an actor as the speaker, we provide a role. And something you need to note is that roles always start with the role symbol. And by default, it's the degree symbol. But you can customize it as well. So we're providing a role symbol. We're providing a role here, civilian 1. And civilian 1 could be anybody. So whenever this line runs, the dialog engine will use whoever is assigned to the role civilian 1 as the speaker. So let me show you. Civilian 1 is also going to introduce themselves, and what we're going to do, we are going to provide the role reference because we don't know which actor is going to be civilian 1 when the line appears on screen, and we're also going to provide the display name. But there's just one more thing to do. We need to assign somebody to the role, to the civilian 1 role. If you go back to the Candy database script, here you have the roles dictionary. And as you can see, we have civilian 1, but it's empty. So I could type a value here, but that defeats the purpose of roles. The purpose of roles is to assign actors when the game runs, not to assign actors in advance. So you have two options. The first option is, in your game, write some code that will assign actors to roles as relevant. Or, another option, you can assign actors to roles during the dialogue. And to do this, you go here, go to the control commands at the bottom of the screen, and add the role command right here. So I'm going to insert the role command before civilian 1 speaks. And here, I need to provide the role I want to assign an actor to. And here, in the reference field, I need to select the actor that I want to assign to the role. And I want to assign John. There we go. So now Alice is going to introduce herself, and then the role command will run, and it will assign John to the role civilian 1. And then, if it works, this line will show John introducing himself and saying, "Hi, I'm John." So let's test it to see it working. So Alice introduces herself, and once I continue, the role command is going to run. It's going to assign John to civilian 1, and then we're not going to see that on screen. It's going to be instant, and then John is going to introduce himself because he is civilian 1. There you go. And notice how providing a role reference here inside the variable reference worked. Earlier I showed you how I could type Alice and then the display name key, and it would make Alice say her full name, Alice Turner. Here, instead of typing an actor reference such as John, I typed a role reference, and Candy Dialog Engine automatically replaced the role reference with the actor assigned to it, which was John. So it basically did this. It replaced the role like this internally, and it was able to display John's name. And one more thing I want to mention about roles is that you can actually clear a role. So here, I'm assigning John to the role Civilian 1. If Civilian 1 has an actor assigned, and I want to remove the assignment entirely, I don't want to replace it with another, I want to just remove it, all I need to do is leave the reference field empty. And this way the role will be reset to having no actor assigned. Also, there's another interesting thing you can do with the role command. Here, I've created a new role called Civilian 2, and I've assigned John to it. Now again, you should not assign roles here in the script, you should only assign roles at runtime. I'm just assigning it here for the purpose of this example. So I've got this new role, Civilian 2, with John assigned. And what I can do here, instead of providing John, I can provide Civilian 2. And what's going to happen is the role command will look who is assigned to Civilian 2, it will see that John is assigned to Civilian 2, and it will assign John to Civilian 1 as well. Let me show you. Hi, I'm Alice, and now I'm John. John was correctly assigned to Civilian 1. Now, one thing I want to clarify. It does not remove John from Civilian 2. John, after this, is assigned to both Civilian 2 and to Civilian 1. So it copies the actor reference to the role. It doesn't move it. It just copies it. Now, what is this useful for? Well, it can be useful if you want to transfer an actor reference from one role to another role. I don't think this is something you will need to do very often. At least most games probably don't need to do this often. But if you do need this option, you can do it. Now we're going to learn about the control commands. The control commands are called that way because they control code in your game. For example, they modify variables, or they can call functions. We're going to start with the set command. The set command can be used to modify any variable in your game, and this applies both to variables in your own code, but also to variables that are native to Godot, for example, variables that belong to nodes. The set command has three data fields. First, you need to provide a variable that you want to modify. Then you need to provide an operator that will indicate how to modify the variable. And finally, you need to provide a value or an expression. To provide a variable, you can do it by simply providing a variable reference, like this. And this will tell the set command that we want to modify this variable. Next, we can provide a value. For example, you can provide 100. Or if you want, you can provide a string. Or really anything you want. It can be a boolean, it could be a float, and so on. Now, I want to modify Alice's gold, and I want to set it to 100. So I'm just going to type 100. And for the operator, well, you can click the button here, and you're going to have a big list of operators sorted by category. Now, I'm not going to go over all the categories because there's a lot of them, and most of these operators are somewhat advanced. Let's look at the basic operators to keep it simple. So we have the equal sign. We can also add the value to the variable or subtract the value, and so on. You should be familiar with these operators because they are identical to GDScript. I'm just going to select the equal operator, so this way the variable will be set to 100 exactly. And now let's test it. There we go. Alice says I have 100 gold coins, so we can see the command worked. And now, just to demonstrate further, let's change the operator to plus equal. And as a reminder, Alice's gold by default is set to 50 at startup. So this will add 100, and Alice should say that her gold is 150. Let's test it. And there you go. I have 150 gold coins. Now, there's a few more things you need to know. First of all, regarding operators, Candy Dialog Engine is using custom code to work with these operators. So it's possible they will not work exactly like you would expect in GDScript. They should work like GDScript, but there could be some differences. So to be on the safe side, I strongly recommend that you test the operators when you use them. Make sure that they produce the results you expect. Another thing to know about the operators is that some of them can work in two different ways. For example, let's look at the operator toString. Now here, if I use the toString operator, it will assign 100 to Alice Gold as a string instead of an integer, like this. That's what will happen inside the code. However, by default, Alice Gold is 50. And if I don't write an expression or value, and I just have this variable and toString, it's going to convert this to a string. It's going to convert the value of the variable to a string, like this. So this is an example of an operator working in two different ways. And many of these operators have similar options. If you provide an expression or value, the operator will operate on the value. But if you don't provide a value, the operator will operate on the variable instead. And there's also something you need to know about the expression field. Candy Dialog Engine uses Godot's built-in expression parsing feature. Now, Godot's expression parsing supports mathematical expressions. For example, this. That will be parsed as 15. And it also supports parentheses, so I could use this, and I could do this, and this would create 10 plus 5, 15, times 3, 45. That would also work. It supports all kinds of values, so strings will also work, floats will work. It also supports comparisons. For example, like this. That works. And it can even support some methods. For example, according to the official documentation, this should work. It should convert 90 degrees to radians. As far as I know, not all methods are supported, but some of them are. So if you want to know what exactly Godot's expression parsing can support or doesn't support, you need to refer to the official Godot documentation. This expression parsing, it's a Godot feature, it's not a Candy Dialog Engine feature. Now, one thing that is definitely not supported by Godot's expression parser is assigning values to variables. For example, if I write this, that's assigning a value to a variable. It's not supported, it's not going to work. Okay. However, you can actually include variables inside an expression by using Candy Dialog Engine's variable reference method. For example, if I write this, okay, let's say I have these two variables in my script and both values are an integer. This would work. Candy Dialog Engine would replace these variable references with the actual values before asking Godot to parse the expression. So this can be quite powerful. You can achieve a lot like this. Previously, I explained that normally when you use a variable reference, Candy Dialog Engine will replace the reference with the value. For example, here, if I did this, imagine I have this variable operator in my script. Let me add it to show you. There we go. Okay, so what would Candy Dialog Engine do? It would replace this with the value of operator, which is this. But here, it's not how that works. Here, it doesn't replace this variable by its value. It's modifying the value of the variable. So, what if you want to provide a variable reference to tell Candy Dialog Engine which variable to modify? Let me explain. Imagine you have this variable named toModify, and the value of toModify is a variable reference. Specifically, it's a reference to Alice Gold. So what if you want to provide this to the command as the variable? Well, you can't do this. That's not going to work. It's going to modify the value of toModify, right? If I set the operator to equal and the expression to 100, it will make globals toModify equal 100. And that's not what we want. We want to replace this reference with this. And I apologize if I'm repeating myself a bit here. I just want to make sure this is very clear. So we want to modify the reference. We want this to become this at runtime. Okay, so how can we do this? Well, it's simple. We can use what's called the super variable symbols. And the super variable symbols are twice the regular symbols. So the super symbol for autoloads is twice the pound sign, like this. And this will tell Candy Dialog Engine, don't modify this variable, replace it with its value. And now Candy Dialog Engine will replace this with this at runtime. Okay, we use the super symbols. And you might be wondering, how do you know when you should use the super symbols instead of the regular symbol? Well, you can just look at the tooltips. If you place your mouse over the name of a data field, a tooltip appears. And if you read the tooltip, at the very bottom of the tooltip, you can see that sentence, use super symbols to provide a variable reference. So anytime you see this, use super symbols, this is when you should use super symbols if you want to provide a reference that will be substituted at runtime. Okay, there's a few other commands that will need super symbols in some places. And each time the tooltip will tell you that you should use a super symbol. Okay, I hope this is clear. And yeah, that's about it for the set command. Also, the super symbols work for every symbol. Okay, if you have a node path, it's twice the $sign. If you provide a reference to the variables dictionary, it's twice the euro sign. And here on the right in the inserts, you have buttons to quickly insert the super symbols in case you have trouble remembering them. And of course, you can customize the super symbols inside the Candy properties script. I showed you before how to modify these symbols, and if you want to modify the super symbols, it's inside the same script. Okay, so I hope that's clear. It shouldn't be too complicated. And now we're going to take a look at the call command. Now, the call command is used for calling a function during the dialog. So, how does it work? Well, there's 4 data fields. There's variable, and this is where you store the value returned by the function if the function returns a value. Then you have await, and this tells Candy Dialog Engine to pause dialog until the function has finished running. And if you set this to true, dialog will pause until the function is finished. If you set it to false, dialog will continue while the function runs. And it's set to 1 or true by default because you probably want the function to finish before dialog continues. Here you have the function that you want to call, and finally you have the arguments. Simple. It's pretty much like GDScript. Now let's look how to provide all these values. First, for variable, you just provide the name of the variable you want to store the function's value in. Like this. If I write this, and if the function returns a value, that value will be stored here in return value. Now, here, for function, you provide a function in the exact same way. You also use the variable reference symbols. Now, let me just show you my script. I have this function here, add gold, and it takes one argument, which is amount. And the function increases Alice's gold by the amount specified. So to call the function, since the function is inside the global script, I would do it like this. Globals add gold. It's exactly like GDScript, except I add the symbol here to tell Candy Dialog Engine that the function is inside an autoload. Also, I don't write any parentheses. In GDScript, you would add parentheses at the end of a function call, and you would write the arguments here inside the parentheses. But in Candy Dialog Engine, you don't do that. If you add parentheses, it will not work. And as for the arguments, you just write them here in this field. And if I want to add 200 gold, I would write 200. If a function has multiple arguments, you can separate the arguments with a comma, like this. Now, that's just an example because my function has only one argument. So I'm going to erase these. And now I'm just going to remove this because the function does not return a value. And let's test. And if the function works, Alice will say she has 250 gold. And there you go, 250 gold. The function was called correctly. You can see here Alice has 50 gold at the start, and the function adds 200 because that's the amount we specified. And here again, if you want to provide a reference that Candy Dialog Engine should replace at runtime, you should use the super symbols. And again, the tooltip tells you to use the super symbols for that purpose. And the same here for function. If you want, this tells Candy Dialog Engine the function to run, but if you want to provide a variable reference to a variable that contains the function, you would use the super symbols. And here too, the tooltip tells you to use super symbols for that purpose. Also, I want to mention, you can use variable references as arguments. So this would work as an example. That would work. Now, while we're at it, let's look at the emit command. The emit command is somewhat similar, except that instead of calling a function, it emits a signal. And you have two fields, signal and arguments. So in the signal field, you can provide a signal that you want to emit. Like this. Simple. And here you provide arguments, and it's exactly the same as the arguments for the function. You can add any value you want, you can use variable references, and you can provide multiple arguments if you separate them with a comma. And then there's also the await command, and the await command waits for a specific signal. So here in the signal field, you provide the signal to wait for, to detect. For example, if you want the command to react when signal 1 is emitted, that's what you would write, assuming signal 1 is located in your global's autoload. And here you also have a variable field, and it's similar to the variable field of the call command. So here in the await command, you can provide a variable where the arguments of the signal should be stored. So if I do this, and if the signal contains arguments, they will be stored here in this variable, and they will be stored as an array. Now let's learn about the flag command. The flag command can be used to modify progression flags, and progression flags are stored here in the flags dictionary inside the Candy database script. And as a reminder, the Candy database script is the same script where you have the actors dictionary. So we're going to modify this flag here, flag 1. It has a default value of 0. So it's pretty simple. First of all, Candy Dialog Creator is capable of giving us a list of all our flags, so we don't even have to type it. And notice we don't need to provide a variable reference here to the flags dictionary because the flag command automatically looks into the flags dictionary. We only need to provide the name of the flag. Next, we can select an operator, and this is similar to the set command. We have the exact same operators. Generally, you would use one of the basic operators. And finally, we have to write an expression. So let's say we're going to increase the flag's value by 1. Alright, and now all we need to do is test it, and Alice is going to tell us the value of the flag after the flag command has run. So here we go. Flag 1 is set to 1. That's exactly the result we expected. Now, something I want to quickly show you. If you go to the CandyDE folder and then the scripts folder and the user data folder, you will find this script here, candyfunctions.gd. And the candyfunctions script contains all kinds of externalized functions which Candy Dialog Engine calls at various points while it's running a dialog. Now, these functions do all kinds of different things, and the script contains a bunch of comments to explain what they do and how you should configure them. And more information is also provided inside the Candy Dialog Engine documentation where relevant. Now, we are interested in a specific function, this one here, xFlagChanged, at the bottom of the script. If you don't see this function in your script, it's probably because you upgraded Candy Dialog Engine from 1.0 to 1.1 and the function was missing in 1.0. But you can add it manually because, as you can see, that's all there is to that function. Now, this function gets called by the flag command after changing the flag's value. And the purpose of the function is simply to run custom code after changing a flag. For example, you could write code that updates quest trackers on screen, or you could write code that triggers a cutscene, a sound, some kind of visual effect, or anything you want. And of course, you can design the function to react differently depending on which flag has changed or what value the flag now has. Now let me explain the arguments. First, you have the color argument, and this tells the function which dialog UI called the function. So if the flag command is inside a dialog that's being run by the Candy UI will be the caller. Next, you have the flag argument, and that's the flag key that was changed. So to show you here, in our example, flag would be flag 1. And then we have the value argument. And this is the new value of the flag after it has been changed. So with these arguments, you should be able to write any kind of custom code you need to trigger specific behavior when a flag changes. And that's all there is to know really about the flag command. It's very simple, very straightforward. You could of course use the set command to modify flags inside the flag dictionary. That works too. But the flag command is simpler because you just provide the name of a flag instead of a full variable reference, and at least the flag command calls the flag changed function, which the set command doesn't do automatically. And now let's learn about the name command. Here we have a new dialog and a new character, construction worker. And construction worker first introduces herself as Jane. And then she asks the player, how are you finding the town so far? Now, in the actor's dictionary, by default, the construction worker's display name is this, construction worker, like that. So this is what's going to display when she speaks. And that's fine for her first line because when she first introduces herself, we don't know her name yet. But after she's introduced herself, we want to display her name as Jane. So this is where the name command comes in handy. I'm going to insert it here after the construction worker has introduced herself. Now, for the name command, I first need to provide a reference, and that can be either an actor reference or a role reference if the character is assigned to a role. Now I'm just going to select the construction worker actor reference. And then I need to provide a new display name. So I'm going to write Jane, like this. And I'm not going to talk about the translation table and the actor fields yet. I will mention them quickly later. For now, let's test our dialog. Here, you can see her name is written as construction worker, and she's introducing herself. Hi, I'm Jane. And if I continue, the name command is going to run, and we're not going to see it because it's going to be instant. And there we go. The name command has run, and it has changed her name to Jane. So now it shows Jane here, and she's asking the player a question. That's the name command at work. Now, I said I would explain the translation table and the actor key fields. The translation table has to do with translations, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. The thing is, you might want to give your characters different names in different languages. Now, Jane would probably be identical in every language, but let's imagine you have a character named the King. So in English, the King works, but if you translate your game to other languages, you might want to translate the King to those languages as well. So to do this, Candy Dialog Engine uses translation tables, and translation tables are dictionaries which tell it how to translate different words or names or strings into different languages. By default, you don't need to provide a translation table here because there is already a default table for names. You just need to add the name translations to the default translation table for names. But if you want to use a different translation table than the default one, you can provide the name of your chosen translation table here. This is a little bit vague right now, and I will explain this a lot better when I talk about translations. So don't worry too much about this for now. Now, the actor key. Now this is an interesting thing. By default, the name command modifies the display name of an actor. But you could use the name command to modify any other key. For example, I could use the name command to modify a character's gender. So all I would need to do would be to write gender here. And now, instead of assigning Jane as the display name, it would assign Jane as the gender. Of course, that wouldn't make sense, but this is just to explain what this does. One limitation is that the name command always assigns a string. You can't assign an integer or a boolean. If you do this, it's not going to assign true as a boolean, it's going to assign true as a string, like that. And same if you assign an integer, it's going to assign the number as a string, not as an actual integer. Okay, so keep this in mind, it's always going to assign the value as a string. And again, by default, if actor key is empty, whatever value you write here in the name field will be assigned as the display name. You don't have to write display name here. That's what it does by default. You only provide an actor key if you want to modify another key. Okay, and that's all there is to know about the name command. And now we're going to learn about dispositions. So here, as a reminder, in spoken lines, there's this disposition field. And I think I briefly mentioned it previously, and you can use it to decide if the line should be displayed on screen or if it should be skipped. Now, if you look at the Candy database script and the actors dictionary, you will notice that actors can have a disposition key. So here Alice has no disposition at the moment. Normally, you would update this during the game at runtime. You would not provide a value in advance unless you have a good reason to do so, because disposition usually changes during the game. Now, what is disposition? Well, it can be anything you want. It can represent what Alice thinks of the player or of another character. It can represent the mood of Alice. It can represent her relationship to the player. That's your choice. Now, for the purpose of testing, I'm going to assign a disposition to Alice. And you can assign any disposition you want. There's no rules. You can invent anything you want. For example, if I want to say that Alice is in the mood for pizza, I could write pizza, and then I would design my game to handle this as meaning that Alice wants to eat pizza. Again, this is your decision. So I'm going to assign the like disposition, and in my example, it means that Alice likes the player. She thinks the player is a nice person. So here I'm going to write a line for Alice. And, well, let's give her a nicer portrait. And she's going to say, "Hey, it's so nice to see you." And we will assign this line the like disposition, like this. And if Alice likes the player, she's going to say this. And if she doesn't like the player, she's not going to say this at all. So let me add a second line to show you. Here. So this line does not have a disposition. And now let's do a quick test to make sure everything is clear. So Alice likes the player, so she says, "Hey, it's nice to see you." And then she says the second line, "What do you want to do?" Now, let me remove Alice's disposition here. So she no longer likes the player, she has no disposition at all. And let's do another test. And now she asks, "What do you want to do?" She didn't say, "Hey, it's nice to see you," because she doesn't have the disposition. Okay, now let's add another line in between. And this will be Alice speaking again. And here we go. And I'm going to give this line the dislike disposition. So if Alice doesn't like the player, if she thinks the player is not a nice person, she will say this. "Oh, it's you again." Okay, and now let me just reassign. I'm going to assign dislike to Alice. So Alice's disposition is now dislike. And let's do a test. And here we go. Alice says, "Oh, it's you again." She's not happy to see the player. And then she asks, "What do you want to do?" So this time, Alice doesn't like the player, so she doesn't say this. And she doesn't like the player, she dislikes the player, so she says this. And finally, she says this no matter what, because this line does not have a disposition. Now, disposition can get much more advanced than that if you need it. Okay, what I showed you there, it's just the basic use of the disposition feature. For example, you can assign multiple dispositions to a line like this. And then you can create rules on matching. For example, you can require that Alice's disposition fully matches all three of these, or you can require that Alice's disposition matches only one, it doesn't matter which one. You can require that she matches at least two, but not necessarily three, or you can require that she matches less than two, or that she doesn't match any of them, and so on and so on. I'm not going to explain how to do this right now because this is very advanced and it's not something most games would need. So you can read the documentation about dispositions if you want to know about this, or I might make another video explaining this in the future. Alright. Now, if you need to change a character's disposition during dialogue, you have the disposition command here. So let me add the disposition command at the start of the dialogue. Here you need to provide a reference. It can be an actor reference or a role reference. That's up to you. I'm going to provide Alice. And here you need to provide the disposition that you want to assign to Alice. So for example, I'm going to write like. Now remember, by default, Alice's disposition is dislike. So this will change her disposition to like, and then Alice will say this line, and she will no longer say that line. So let's test it. Hey, it's nice to see you. Her disposition was changed to like. Okay, that's it for dispositions. And now to finish up with the control commands, let's learn about the export and import commands. Now these commands are a little bit more advanced than the previous ones, and they can be used essentially as a save and load system. The export command is used to export variables to an external file. So instead of saving variables inside your code, this would save variables inside a file on the player's disk. Now, in order to use the export command, you first need to provide a path, and you do so with res or user, like this. I'm not going to explain what res and user do. These are Godot features, so if you don't know what they are, look up the official Godot documentation. Now, as an example, to provide a path to the user folder, you would do it like this. And note that the export command is going to automatically create folders in the path if they don't exist. Next, you need to provide a name for the file, and I'm going to name my file save1. The third step is to select an export format, and you have multiple options: txt, config, ini, JSON, CSV, binary, even base 64, and then you have tres and res, which are Godot formats. You also have dialogue as an option. Now this one is a little bit different. If you have an actual Candy Dialog Engine dialogue loaded in a dictionary in your game, you can export it as a dialog file. And this is the same type of dialog file that Candy Dialog Creator exports. Now, why would you need this? Well, I don't know. That depends. You may find it useful, you may not, but the option is there if you want it. As an example here, I'm going to select the txt format. And after that, you need to select an export method. And that's basically what happens with the file. By default, timestamp is selected, and this will add the date and time that the file was created at the end of the file name. You can also simply select overwrite, and it's just going to name your file exactly like you wrote it here. It won't add anything to the name. And however, if a file with that name and this extension already exists, it will be overwritten, so be careful. You also have skip, and that means if the file already exists with the same name and the same format, it's not going to be exported, it's going to be skipped. So this way nothing is overwritten, but you're also not actually exporting any variables. And then you have duplicate. And here, if the file already exists with the same name and the same format, it will create a new file with a suffix such as 1, 2, 3, and so on. And this avoids overwriting, but be aware that the name can be a little bit unpredictable. Now here in the data field, you would provide the variables that you want to export, and you do that by writing them as variable references like this. And if you want to provide multiple variables, you can just separate them with a comma like this. Also, to improve readability, you can split the variables over multiple lines. That works as well. Now, let me just delete the import line because it's not configured, and I'm going to test this inside a dialog. Now, we don't see anything on screen because my dialog doesn't have any spoken text. It only has the export command, so nothing shows up. It's all happening in the background. But now I'm going to open my user folder and we'll see if the file has been correctly exported. And as you can see here, inside my user folder, I have folder 1, which was created, and then folder 2, which was also created. And here I have save1.txt. So the file was created, and let's look inside to see what was actually written to it. And here it is. It wrote our variables. Global's Alice Gold equals 50 and Global's Alice Health equals 1000. That's exactly how I have my variables when the export command runs. Notice it wrote the symbol here, and that's because if we import the variables later, Candy Dialog Engine needs to know if these variables are autoloads or if they are found inside nodes or something else. So everything worked fine. So now let's look at the import command. The import command is basically the export process in reverse. It's going to load variables from an exported file. One thing to note is that the import command always loads all the variables in the given file. So if you don't want to import some variables, you need to export multiple different files. Now here in the path, you just need to provide the path to the file you want to load. And in my case, this is it. Next, you need to provide the name of the file. And finally, you need to provide the format or the extension of the file. In my case, this is txt. Alright, and that's all there is to it, and I will explain the dictionary field in a moment. For now, let's just do some tests. Now, for the purpose of testing, I'm adding a few extra lines so we can see whether the import command actually worked. So here's what's going to happen. First, the export command will export the starting value for Alice's gold coins, which is 50. So it's going to export 50. Then the set command is going to modify the coins and give Alice 2000 coins instead of 50. Now this is inside the game. It's not inside the exported file. After the set command changes Alice's gold to 2000, Alice will tell us how many coins she has, and she should tell us she has 2000 gold coins. Then the import command will import the original value, which is 50. So Alice's coins should change from 2000 back to 50. And finally, Alice will confirm. She's going to tell us that she has 50 gold coins if it worked. So let's try it. Okay, so first the export command ran, then the set command changed the number of coins, and here Alice is telling us she has 2000 gold coins. That's correct. And now we are going to re-import the 50 gold coins, and let's see what Alice says. Now I only have 50 gold coins. Alright, it worked perfectly. Now, I mentioned the dictionary field here, and here's what the dictionary field does. Right now, in our previous example, the import command loaded the values back to the actual variables. So the import command, for example, loaded 50 directly into the variable Alice Gold. However, you have the option of providing a dictionary here. Now, the dictionary has to exist in your script. It can't be created at runtime. But you can provide a dictionary, and the import command will load the variables inside the dictionary instead of loading them to the actual variables directly. And this can be used if you need your code to do something with the variables before loading them back into the actual variables. I don't know, maybe you want to modify the values, or maybe you want your code to read the values and do something else with them, trigger something depending on what the values are. So yeah, if you don't want to load directly to the actual variables, you can load to a dictionary instead, and whatever you do with that, that's up to you. There's also something you need to be aware of. I said this is basically a save and load system. That's because when you make a game and you want to create a save and load system, that's essentially what a save and load system is. It saves specific variables to a file on the disk, and then when the player loads the game is going to read that file and load the data from it back into the memory. So yeah, it's similar to a save and load system. However, this is not a complete save and load system, because depending on your game, simply reloading the variables might not be enough. You might need your game to reset animations, or to restart some events, or display some stuff. I don't know. But typically just reloading variables is not everything that a save and load system does. So the export and import variables are one part of a save and load system. They're the main part, the central part of a save and load system. But you may need to also program some additional behaviors after the data has been imported or loaded. So just be aware of that. Other than that, it's similar to any regular save and load system you might program in your game in Godot. Now, one of the challenges about using the export command is that you have to tell it which variables to export. And you could have potentially dozens or hundreds of variables to export, depending on your game and what you're trying to do. And, well, the first challenge is finding all the variables that need to be exported. So that's a bit of work. Since you're programming your own game, you should know what these variables do, so you should know which ones you need to export and import later. But yeah, that's something you will need to do. And if you include the export command in multiple places in your dialogues, you probably don't want to write the same variables by hand all the time. So you could keep a list of all the variables so that you can quickly copy and paste it into the export commands. But there's also another option, and that option is presets. And I mentioned these earlier at the beginning of the video, and now I'm going to show you what presets are. So let's now learn about presets. Presets are basically lines or groups of lines with pre-written data. So you can quickly insert pre-formatted lines in your dialog. If you look here at the bottom where you have all the commands, you have these two tabs, user and profile, and these are for user presets and profile presets. And I already have a few profile presets. To create or modify presets, you need to go up here to the conversation selection button and select either user presets or profile presets. And as a reminder, these are not actual conversations in your dialog. They're saved separately from the dialog and they are not exported with dialogues. But they do act like conversations. So here I'm going to select profile presets. And here I have this preset called Alice Gold. Now notice the name has this here between brackets. It has set. This is the category. If you look down here again, notice there's a tab called set. That's the category. And in that tab, in that category, I have two presets, Alice Gold and Alice Health. So this is how you assign a preset to a category. You first write the category name between brackets and then add a space and then write the preset name. And you can name your presets anything you want, and you can also name the categories anything you want. Candy Dialog Creator will create categories and presets automatically. So here I have the preset Alice Gold. In the Candy Dialog Creator, it's treated like a block. So you can add lines to it. Let me delete those. And I have this line. And this line is a set command with data already written inside. It has the Alice Gold variable as a variable reference. And it has the equal operator. And it doesn't have a value, because whenever I use that preset, I'm going to assign a different value each time. So that's my preset. And now if I go back to conversation 1, and I'm going to add my preset here as line number 6. So I'm just going to click the Alice Gold button, and now my preset has been added. And notice it's been added with the data that was pre-written. So this way I don't have to waste my time providing this variable reference over and over again. I just need to set the value that I want to assign to the variable, and that's it. It's a lot quicker. And yeah, as I mentioned, a preset can have multiple lines. So if you have a group of lines that you want to regularly insert in your dialogues, you can add more lines here, that's fine, and you can add data for all of them. Now you're probably wondering, what's the difference between profile presets and user presets? Remember, in Candy Dialog Creator, when you launch the application, you need to create a user. And each user can have their own profiles. So a user is you. You're the user. And if you have friends or colleagues who also use your computer, they will create their own user. And as a reminder, you should have a profile for every Godot project, because every Godot project has different settings. So let me just go back here. And so what's the difference? Well, profile presets are saved to your profile. That means you can access profile presets only inside the profile where they are created. So if I had a different profile, I wouldn't see those presets. They're profile exclusive. However, user presets are available to all the profiles of a user. So if I have presets that I want to use for multiple projects, multiple profiles, I would save those presets under user presets, not profile presets. And that's the only difference. Now, a few more details I want to mention. First, if you modify a preset after inserting it, let's say here, I'm going to insert Alice Gold, and it has this variable here. If I go back to my preset and I modify the variable to something else, and I go back to my conversation, it will not update. Okay, that's normal. This line is not connected to the preset. Once it's been inserted, it's just a regular line, so you can change the preset and it will not change the lines. Don't worry about that. Also, if you ever, let's say you create a preset as a profile preset, and then you realize, you have a lot of lines, and then you realize you made a mistake and you wanted to make it a user preset, you don't have to recreate the entire preset as a user preset. You can just cut or copy the lines and go to your user preset and paste the lines. So don't worry about making a mistake here between user or profile. It's easily fixed. And now let's learn about condition commands. Now, condition commands are very simple. They check if a condition is true, if it's fulfilled, and if it is, they run a dialog line. And condition commands work exactly like conditions in GDScript. You have an if command, elif command, else command, and we even have for and while loops. Okay, let's start with the basics. Here we have the if command, and there's the condition field. So in the condition field, you need to write a condition. For example, well, you would probably need a variable reference, and let's do it like this. There we go. If Alice's gold is smaller than 50, do something. Now, just so you know, you can actually use parentheses, and you can also use a bit of syntax. For example, I could do this. Let me just change this to bigger. If Alice's gold is bigger than 50, and Alice gold is smaller than 200, do this. And you can use OR, and you can even use XOR. So yeah, that works. And you can even nest parentheses if you want, like this. It's pretty much identical to GDScript. Okay, now let me just reset this to what I had initially. If Alice gold is smaller than 50. And next, you have the condition effect here, and this is the dialog line you want to run if the condition is true. So what do we want to happen if Alice's gold is lower than 50? Well, we want Alice to say something. So you can see here, you can select any command, and you can even select a spoken line. So that's what we're doing. And now, here, we have the if command at the top, and we have the spoken line at the bottom. And now we can create a line for Alice. I can't buy anything. Right. Let's test it. But first, we need to actually make Alice's gold smaller than 50, because currently it's exactly 50. So I'm going to change it to 25, and now we're going to test it. So here we go. I can't buy anything. Alice is disappointed. So you can see it worked. And just to make sure that it's not displaying the line no matter what, let's change the goal to 100. And now nothing should be displaying at all. There we go, nothing displays. So yeah, it's really that simple. Just select whatever command you want to run when the condition is fulfilled, and you can choose any command. I could use a call command instead, and now I can provide data for the call command. But what if you want to run multiple commands when a condition is fulfilled? Well, in that case, there's a very simple solution. You can just use a transition command. For example, you can use the bridge command, and here you can configure the bridge to simply transition to another block. For example, block 2. And now, inside block 2, you can add whatever commands you need to run, or even dialog lines, or whatever you want. And as a reminder, a bridge command is a momentary transition. So the Candy dialog engine is going to run all these lines in order, and then it will simply go back where it came from, and it will continue after the if command. Now, one limitation you should be aware of is that a condition command cannot trigger another condition command. If you look here, the condition commands are missing from the list. So if you want to nest condition commands, you need to, again, use a transition. For example, here, I'm going to set up the bridge to transition to block 3. And in block 3, I can have more condition commands. And these condition commands can further transition to another block. For example, block 4. And in block 4, I can add yet more condition commands. So this is how you would nest conditions if you want to do it. Now let's talk a little bit about the other condition commands, elif and else. They work exactly like in GDScript. So for elif, you also provide a condition, and then you select a command that the elif condition will run if the condition is fulfilled. For else, there's no condition. That's the very definition of else. But you do need to select a command that will run if else is true. Now, one thing to be mindful of is chaining. For example, here I have an if command followed by elif followed by else. So the dialog engine will check if the if condition is true, and if it's not true, it will check if the elif condition is true, and if it's not true, it will check if the else condition is true. It's just like GDScript, and you can add as many elif as you want. Now, one thing to be careful of is that you can't have any other commands inside the chain. For example, here, if I add a set command, this is going to break the chain. So first, the dialog engine will check if the if condition is true, and then it checks if the elif condition is true. Then it checks the second elif, and here the chain is broken. So the remaining elif and else will not work, they will be skipped. So make sure you don't break your chains by accident. And of course, a chain always starts with if, and it doesn't need to end with anything in particular. As I showed you earlier, if you have just if and you don't have any elif or else, it works. And now let's learn about the for and while command. Now these commands work exactly like the for loop and the while loop in GDScript. Now the for loop is a little bit different from the other condition commands because while it has a condition data field, you're a bit more limited in what you can write as a condition. Basically, the condition you write must always follow the A in B format. Now, you can replace A and B by whatever you want, but you need to follow that format. For example, here, I can write I, and here I can provide a variable reference, globals my array. So here, assuming that this variable is an array, this for command is going to iterate through the array. And for every iteration, it's going to run another command or a spoken line. For example, for every iteration of the loop, I can run a set command. Okay. You can also replace I with a variable reference if you want, like this. Now, if you have a purpose for doing this, it would work. It just depends what's the value of this variable and, importantly, what type of variable it is. But again, this is essentially the same as the for statement, the for loop in GDScript. So don't worry too much about it and write the condition like you would write a for loop in GDScript. Another thing to know is that you can use the for command to iterate through arrays. For example, like this, if I provide some values here, okay, this will iterate through all of this. That works. And it also works with dictionaries. For example, I can do this. Okay, it's going to iterate through those two keys. And you can also use range. For example, and that's identical to GDScript, I can write this for I in range 5. Or I can provide a range between two numbers, like this, for I in range 4, 12. So it's going to iterate from 4 to 12. And you can even provide a third number if you want to skip regular intervals. For example, here, if the third number is 2, it's going to iterate 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. It's going to iterate one out of two numbers. And you could use 3. In that case, it would iterate 4, 7, 10, and so on. And one more thing to know is how can you use I? Because in GDScript, you could use I. Okay, I becomes a variable. So how do you use it here? Well, I is stored in a dictionary inside your dialog UI, or more specifically inside the Candy Engine script attached to your dialog UI. So let me show you. Let's add a spoken line, and we're gonna have Alice talking because she's nice, she has nice portraits, and we want Alice to tell us the value of I each iteration. So here's how it works. You can use self. That works. Now self exists in GDScript. The prefix self exists in GDScript, and you can use it in Candy Dialog Engine. You just need to write the autoload or singleton symbol before self. Self is considered an autoload from Candy Dialog Engine's perspective. Okay, and then I is stored in a dictionary called for underscore. This is a dictionary in the Candy Engine script, and it stores I. Now, you also need to tell the Candy Dialog Engine that you're looking for the value of I specifically, because again, you can write I, you can write AAA, you can write anything you want. And so we've written I, so we want I. So I is stored as a key, like this. Okay? And if I had written AAA, then here I would write AAA. I hope that's clear. I'm going to change it back to I for clarity. Okay, that's it. This is going to tell us the value of I each iteration. And let me just change the range back to 5 to keep it simple. Like that. Okay, let's test it. Here we go. And Alice says 0. Now that's normal. If you're experiencing Godot in GDScript, you know that's normal. If you're a beginner, a range starts at 0, not 1. So Alice is going to count from 0 to 4 because we asked for the range 5. So let's see. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Finished. So yeah, we were able to retrieve the value of I the way that I showed you. Okay, like this. Let me just show you inside without the formatting symbols here. Okay, so this is how you find I. Autoload symbol, self, period, for underscore dictionary, and then I, or whatever you used, as a key in that dictionary. Simple. You do have to remember this, that's true. But you're probably not going to use it often. You know, this, in terms of dialogue, this is starting to become a bit of an advanced feature. But yeah, if you need to use it, that's how you do it. And of course, you can use that in other commands in case that's not clear. For example, here, you can provide, let's say I'm providing a reference to an array, and I want to append each value of I. So for the operator, I select append, and there you go. It's going to iterate, and each time it iterates, it appends the value of I to the array. And when the for command is finished iterating, the array contains all the values that I had during the iteration. Okay, and now let's look at the while loop. Now here you would write a condition like we did for if or elif. For example, I can write this. So if I have this condition here, as long as this variable, my integer, is greater than 10, for each, well, the loop will continue iterating. And for each iteration, it's going to run a command. And you can select whatever command you want. And as I mentioned previously, if you want to run multiple commands, you can use a bridge transition or perhaps a jump transition. Although be careful with jump because it's a permanent transition, so it won't come back to the loop. It's just gonna jump, and the loop should end. So bridge is probably the way to go in that case. Now there's one very important thing you need to know about the while command. It has a built-in safety limit. That means by default it can only loop a specific number of times and then it's gonna stop entirely. There's a maximum to the number of loops or iterations it can make. And if you want to configure the safety limit, you can find it in the Candy properties script, which I showed you before. It's the same script where you can configure the symbols. So if you scroll down, here you have this variable, while safety break. That's the safety limit. And by default, it's set to 1000. So that means the while command can loop 1000 times at most, and then it will automatically stop. If you want to set a different number, because this is too big or too small for your taste, you can do that. That works. And if you want to disable the safety limit entirely, you don't want any limit, then you can set it to -1. Now be careful if you disable the limit, because if you don't design your loops properly, you can accidentally cause an infinite loop. That means it's a loop that never ends, and that would cause the dialogue and your game to be stuck inside a loop. So, you know, the risk exists in GDScript as well. This is not a new risk introduced by Candy Dialog Engine. And finally, I want to give you a tip. Let's imagine that you have multiple condition commands. So here I have an if command and 2 elif commands. And each of these conditions is checking Alice's amount of gold, like this. Now, well, I don't need to make each condition transition to a different block. You can see here, they all transition to the same block, but they don't transition to the same line. Okay, so let's take a look at how my block 2 is designed. So here I have, well, my block is split into 3 parts. This is the first part. I have this line mark with the reference low gold. And under this line mark, Alice says, I can't buy anything. And then there's a return command to return from the bridge, because we don't want Alice to say this, and then this, and then this. We want her to say just this, and then return. The second part of the block, it has a new line mark, moderate gold, and Alice says, I can buy a few things. And she looks less sad. And then there's a return command again, so we return to block 1. And finally, the third part, there's a line mark with the reference high gold. And Alice is happy, and she says, I can buy everything I need. And then there's also a return command to return back to the conditions. So now each condition is set to transition to bridge to a different line mark. If Alice has less than 50 gold, then it will bridge to the low gold line mark, and Alice will say that she can't buy anything. If Alice has between 50 and 500 gold, it will transition to the moderate gold line mark, and Alice will say that she can buy a few things. And if Alice has more than 500 gold, it's going to transition to the high gold line mark, and Alice will say that she can buy everything she needs. So, you know, splitting an entire block like this can be more convenient rather than spreading all these condition results across multiple blocks. Now that's up to you. In terms of code, it doesn't matter. For Candy Dialog Engine, it's the same. But for you, when you're writing, editing dialogues, it might be convenient to have all the different condition results inside the same block, so you can look at all of them at once and modify them quickly one after the other if needed. So yeah, just a tip.